have been reported. Hazardous materials have been identified.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the headlines this hour. President Donald Trump says Ukraine has 1 week to accept his peace plan. Kyiv and Europe push back as Moscow says the proposal needs more discussion. Over 300 students and staff have been abducted from a school in Niger State. Security forces and local hunters are searching for the children. Climate negotiators in Brazil are working into overtime after failing to reach a deal. Countries remain split on a text that omits a fossil fuel phase-out. China accuses Japan of threatening armed intervention over Taiwan in a letter to the UN. The exchange marks a sharp escalation in a 2-week dispute. South Africa's president opens the G20 by urging stronger global unity. The summit begins without President Trump, who is boycotting the event. The US and China have held 3 days of maritime security talks in Hawaii. Both sides call the meetings frank and constructive as military contacts reopen. Vietnam says 55 people are dead and 13 are missing after a week of heavy flooding. Rescue teams are still searching isolated and waterlogged areas. Marjorie Taylor Greene says she is resigning after a bitter clash with President Trump. He recently labeled her a traitor, calling her exit good news. And viewers, let's give you news on the Japan-China feud. Now, China has intensified its criticism of Japan, submitting a formal letter to the United Nations condemning Prime Minister Sanae Takichi's recent remarks on Taiwan. In the letter, China's UN envoy Fu Kong has accused Takaichi of making erroneous and dangerous statements by linking a potential Taiwan contingency to Japan's security, something Beijing says no Japanese leader has done in an official setting since 1945. Fu has said the comments amounted to Japan signaling possible military involvement in the Taiwan issue, which he described as a threat of force against China. Beijing has said it raised objections repeatedly with Tokyo but received no retraction. The letter argues that Japan's position isolates international law, undermines the post-war order, and alarms Asian countries once affected by Japanese militarism. Beijing also urged Japan to reflect on its historical responsibilities and stop what it views as provocative actions. The letter will be circulated to all UN member states as an official General Assembly document. And we now have Andrew K.P. Luong, who's a China strategist, joining us live from Hong Kong to share his opinion on the issue. Welcome to you and thanks for joining us on this bulletin on NewsX World. Now, I just want to ask you a very straightforward questions. Could you just help us firstly spell out China's concerns that it's going to raise at the United Nations Forum?
Well, of course, I've explained the dynamics surrounding Taiwan on many occasions on this channel. I'll just focus on this latest Chinese government move to send a complaint to the United Nations. Now, this elevated this issue to international law. But of course, if you look at the map, or you can Google, the distance between Japan and Taiwan is 1,333 miles, or over 2,400 kilometers. So if there is a in case there is a conflict in Taiwan, would it constitute an existential threat to Japan, that of course is debatable. So that's a very important point because you can say that what's happened in the Antarctica could threaten your own national security. I mean, to stretch a point. But on the other hand, of course, the Taiwan occupies a very strategic position in the Asia Pacific, and of course, the United States also has expressed. Also have provisions in the so-called five assurances and also the three communiques and the Taiwan Relations Act, opposing any unilateral use of force to change the status quo. But of course, neither Japan nor the United States recognize Taiwan as a country because Taiwan has already been de-recognized. As a country at the time of President Nixon's visit. But of course, that international law is not everything. For example, President Trump recently wanted to send troops to even Sudan because the Sudanese were killing Christians. So it's just like the Crusades, you know. I mean, so international law is not be all and end all. But of course, the Japanese government has reinterpreted its own wartime constitution and then making it legal for so-called collective self-defense. But what is legal within Japan doesn't necessarily meaning that it complies with international law. Because under and also the laws of diplomacy, normally expects that countries do not interfere with other countries' internal affairs, and all these principles are enshrined in the United Nations. But now we live in a world which is not governed by international law, is governed by self-interest, is governed by a lot of geopolitics, is governed by exertion of their own internal agenda. You can just look at what President Trump is doing, with his tariffs, sanctioning and rattling the whole world's supply and value chain. But of course, the biggest misunderstanding is that as if Beijing is going to invade Taiwan anytime soon, without realizing that it's always been Beijing's primary objective to achieve unification by peaceful means, by people-to-people exchanges, by military deterrence, by economic pressures, so as to push Taiwan towards the negotiation table. And then, of course, the peaceful means for the future of Taiwan is also complies with the United States Taiwan Relations Act and the so-called three communiques on the Taiwan issue, or the five assurances. Americans' position still remains that the United States doesn't recognize Taiwan as a country, does not take sides on how the future of Taiwan is going to be negotiated. It only opposes the use of force. However, Beijing is not putting force as the primary measure. In fact, it's only a contingency. Beijing always wants Taiwan to be reunited peacefully, and that's the wishes of the people on both sides. So there is a lot of twisted rhetoric, a lot of national self-interest, and as far as Japan is concerned, you have a new administration which is very hawkish, which is a revisionist and wants to revise the Japanese wartime constitution to enable Japan to rearm itself. And of course, the Beijing wants to send this signal to the United Nations to warn other countries not to interfere in this what is, Beijing regards as the internal matter. Apart from the fact that, of course, a lot of the countries still do not realize how much importance Beijing places on achieving this aim through peaceful unification. And that's why it's promoting people-to-people exchanges and providing more opportunities for Japanese young people to seek their opportunities on the mainland. So I think that kind of development complies with what the United States policy on Taiwan all along.
But given that Takaichi is now pursuing closer relationship with Trump and the United States, and that she has pledged to increase defense spending in Japan, how soon can we expect that happening?
Well, of course, as far as the President Trump is concerned, he wants other countries to increase the defense spending to at least 3%, if not 5%. The United States defense spending is more than 5%. President Trump regards that the American system is being milked by other countries, riding on Americans' military umbrella without paying their due share. And that's why the United States wants the European countries to increase their defense spending, and likewise, the United States wants Japan to increase their defense spending. And of course, increasing their defense spending also means purchases of American armament. So the Trump administration is going to make more money out of that. But of course, it's also regarded as a fair sharing of responsibilities. So I think that the Japan, of course, houses the American military forces, and also with the first island chain centered in Okinawa, second island chain centered in Guam, lots of American assets. So the Trump administration is exerting pressure on Japan to increase their military spending.
All right, and at the UN itself, what kind of support should China be expecting from other member states?
Could you repeat your question? What support?
I wanted to ask you, given that China is sending this letter out at the UN, what are the nations that China is expecting to side with it on the issue?
Well, I think that many countries do not want a war between China and Japan, because that's likely to drag in the United States at some point. It's going to rattle the stability of the region. So regardless of the legality, countries do not want this kind of hawkish rhetoric. So that's one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is that Beijing wants to send this letter to the United Nations, knowing that it's going to be circulated to all other countries. So it serves as a warning to other countries not to follow suit, because don't forget that in the Asia Pacific, the United States has got forming military alliance to counter China. You have the so-called Quad with India and Japan and Australia. You have the AUKUS, the Australian nuclear submarine deal. And recently there is a closer military partnership between Japan and South Korea, between Japan and the Philippines. So countries in the region are involved there in any way. But of course, there are other countries, for example, in Europe, and they also took part in the so-called freedom of navigation. And even NATO, at one point, was talking about expanding their influence to the Asia Pacific, because they thought, well, the argument is that what happens in the Asia Pacific affects the security in Europe. I mean, you can stretch the point. As I said, I mean, you can say that what happened in Antarctica would threaten the security in your country. So I think that the sending of this letter serves different purposes. Warning to Japan, a kind of warning to other nations, and raising this issue about regional stability, so that other countries can also chip in as a counterweight against Japan's revisionism.
All right, I thank you for joining us and sharing your opinion with us here on NewsX World. Without fears, let's move on. Now, an independent director on the BBC's board, Sumit Banerjee, has resigned following the controversy surrounding the edited speech by US President Donald Trump. The edit, shown on BBC's Panorama News program, led to public backlash and the threat of a $5 billion lawsuit against the BBC. Sumit Banerjee, who is also associated with Reliance Industries and formerly led Booz and Company, has stepped down a few weeks before his term was set to end. The BBC's new department has reported that Banerjee has expressed frustration over governance issues in his resignation letter. He has also stated that he was not consulted on key decisions, particularly those related to the departures of BBC's Director General Tim Davie and the BBC News CEO Deborah Turness. Both officials resigned on the 9th of November earlier this month amidst accusations of bias, especially concerning the handling of Trump's speech. Moreover, the broadcaster issued an apology on the November 13th, acknowledging the incorrect edits of Trump's speech, but maintained that there was no legal grounds for a defamation lawsuit. And we now move on, viewers. Hanan Alta Khashoggi, the wife of murdered journalist Jamal Khashoggi, held a press conference in Washington, D.C. alongside Representatives Eugene Windman and Jamie Raskin. She called for the release of a transcript of a 2019 phone call involving President Donald Trump and Saudi officials. She urged the United States to declassify the document, telling officials not to imitate Middle Eastern dictators and to uphold their role as a model of modern civilization. Representative Jamie Raskin condemned Trump's relationship with Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, calling the week a disgrace and shame as Trump honored and embraced his business partner, the homicidal Crown Prince. Raskin said the country is being pulled towards authoritarian monarchy, noting that while Congress debated an absurd resolution on socialism, the horrors of theocratic authoritarianism were ignored and even endorsed by Trump and his Republican colleagues. Let's listen in to what Hanan Alta Khashoggi had to say.
Do not be copy of Middle East dictator country. We look to you here as a role model of modern civilization. Please maintain it. I insist to get this content of the conversation between President Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to stand with the truth. I need to know that what is the truth in this conversation.
And with that, viewers, let's move on to news coming in from Myanmar on explosions in the scam centers. Hundreds of Chinese foreign nationals have been arrested in a raid at the KK Park scam compound in Maiwari town near the Thai-Myanmar border. The footage released of the crackdown shows buildings in the compound demolished by explosives and pulled apart by excavators. Hundreds of foreign nationals were seen sitting on the road with their belongings, some with their heads lowered before they were led away. As per reports on November 17, Myanmar's Junta leader Minong Heleng had told military commanders at a regional headquarters to eradicate scam centers as a national responsibility. However, he did not provide further details. Reports suggest that so far they have demolished over 180 buildings, detained over 1,000 foreign nationals. Meanwhile, 2,653 computers have been seized and 21,750 mobile phones have been confiscated. And now we move on to South Asia and news coming in from India, where stricter pollution curbs are expected to kick in soon to tackle the worsening air quality in capital New Delhi and nearby regions with the onset of winter. The Commission for Air Quality Management has revised its rules under the Graded Response Action Plan to prevent the air quality from deteriorating further. The new rules bring restrictions from the GRAP 4 stage under GRAP 3 in view of a 401 plus AQI. The capital recorded an AQI of 360 this morning, considering very poor as per the CPCB standards. As the AQI climbs, air quality worsens, making it increasingly harmful to breathe, especially for vulnerable populations. In April, the World Health Organization estimated that air pollution kills an estimated 7 million people worldwide every year. WHO data shows that 9 out of 10 people breathe air containing high levels of pollutants. On November 14 last year, Delhi became the world's most polluted city as its air quality index soared to an alarming 1,000, prompting an immediate air emergency. This crisis of pollution in the national capital has persisted year after year, with government taking certain measures to curb it, but most of them seem to have failed. More recently, cloud seeding was resorted to in the national capital, an experiment that failed miserably and cost the taxpayers more than 1 crore rupees. Now, as we see, the Commission for Air Quality Management has revised its rules under the Graded Response Action Plan to prevent further deteriorating of air quality. The neighboring states have also been asked to cut down of burning of their farm residues. New rules from restrictions have been placed, including moving from GRAP 4 stage to even higher control measures in view of an increasing AQI in the NCR region. In fact, we're now cutting across to some live visuals. These are the visuals coming in from New Delhi. Now, as you see data on your screens, the air quality as of now in New Delhi stands at 208 and is in the severe category as the temperature stands at 26 degrees Celsius as winter has kick-started in the national capital. In fact, let's now go across to Chetan Agarwal, who is forest analyst and an environmentalist who's joining us from the national capital of India, New Delhi. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Agarwal, for joining us on NewsX World.
Thank
The
you.
crisis of air pollution has been persistent in India, in New Delhi over the years. The governments have taken several measures. We've also seen a change in the government this year, but no change in pollution levels is evident. What do you think should the government be doing to at least bring down the pollution levels by some degrees?
Yeah, hi. Unfortunately, it's a fairly, it's not a short-term issue. It's most of the things which have to be done will have a lag time. So there are things which have to be done which will take a year or two, 3. So what really happens is that for this period of when the pollution peaks for a 1 month or 2 month in the year, we kind of wake up and say that it's getting worse every year and so on, and then when it's after January, it's kind of the governments forget about it. So all the pious noises which are made that we need to look at vehicles, we need to look at our thermal power plants, we need to look at biomass waste burning and so on. So all of that kind of, we just forget about it. So we really need a process, it's by and large well understood what needs to be done. Immediately, I think the steps which we have taken in terms of putting restrictions on vehicles, that has some impact on the older vehicles, but it's kind of, it disproportionately impacts the people who have older vehicles who are not maybe that well off, and they're still hanging on to their older cars and two-wheelers and so on. But one kind of thing which can be done is that the high polluting vehicles, even the ones which are allowed to run, you have a subset of vehicles which are high polluting for various reasons. They're not tuned well or so. So on the vehicular front, if we set up, like we have speed traps, if you are over speeding, then you get caught, and you get a challan. So similarly, if there are technologies now well available where you can put a camera which will monitor the exhaust from the tailpipe, and you get an instant reading of vehicles which are crossing an area. So you can quickly identify and flag down the ones which are high pollutants, which are so sometimes you see a vehicle which is spewing black smoke on the road, which is probably 20, 50 times a normal kind of vehicle. So that's an example of the kind of things which can be done. But biomass burning, vehicular pollution, stubble burning from the Punjab and Haryana from the western side, basically. I mean, these are three big winter sources of pollution. Unfortunately, Delhi NCR is, I mean, the way the weather functions in winter, there's less breezes, so there's less wind, and there's kind of temperature inversion. So pollution comes in from outside, and it also, in addition to what we are generating locally, and then because of the low wind levels, it settles there. So it's not getting blown away.
But what do you think, Mr. Agarwal, has prevented the government so far from declaring this as a health emergency? We've seen more and more reports coming out from hospitals warning people how people in the national capital of India have decreasing lifespan now because of the air pollution, but the government has not used that nomenclature to call it a health emergency as yet.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that it's a health emergency of both short run and long run, with consequences. So it's a short run health emergency because it's really spiky, and it's a long run health emergency. It's probably the biggest kind of health issue in the NCR right now. And maybe one reason, like the government doesn't, when we had COVID, we were asked to wear masks and maintain distance and so on. And if you didn't wear a mask, you would get fined and so. But here, there's not even, there's no advisory that we should protect ourselves, especially the older people and the kids. I'm in my 50s, so I have a certain lifespan left, but my kids who are in their 20s, they're impacted much more, and people who are in their teens and in their younger people, their exposure to this is going to be lifelong. So, but I think one reason why governments don't emphasize on the health emergency part is that it will then show them up in a bad light, that why are they not able to take care of this issue. So
but the air quality index is speaking for itself, and the government must step up.
So the doctors have started speaking up. The AIMS doctors and other doctors in the NCR, they've said, I have not heard this before. They said, if you can, please leave. I have not heard this messaging before. So at an individual level, the doctors are speaking up, but at the level of our health officers and the health ministry and the health minister, the health secretary, we are not getting this kind of messaging. We should masks should be made mandatory actually right now, or there should be a strong advisory. They should be available freely. So we understand that it's an intractable kind of situation. You can't solve air pollution in a few weeks.
All right, but I'm running short on time on this bulletin, but I do appreciate you joining us and giving your insights. Well, with that, viewers, that's all we have time for, but do keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.